welcome back to StabilityWOD. Have you ever suffered an ankle sprain? My guess is you have, because A, you're watching this video, and B, because it's one of the most common injuries that people, and especially athletes, suffer as they're training. What's more is ankle sprains are quite insidious in that they seem to go away quickly, but afterwards they can wreak havoc and cause problems in other parts of your body. That's what we're going to talk about today on StabilityWOD. One of the things I want to share with you today with regard to ankle sprains is that you should not be ignoring them. They are not benign passing events. They're not like a cold. They're not self-limiting. And in fact, they come up so often when I'm talking to clients about other injuries, foot pain, knee pain, hip pain, especially when we're talking about past medical history. People have severe ankle sprains, they have ankle fractures. This is years ago, 5+ years ago. They think that that's in their past, but yet here we are talking about some new injury. So often there are objective findings, things I find during the evaluation that come up that lead me back to that old ankle injury, and we're able to connect that to the person's current injury. In some cases, that current injury, whether it's knee pain, hip pain, or back pain, won't go away until we address the old ankle issues. I always say ankles are tough joints, and they're the type of ankle sprains are the type of injuries that we can typically walk off relatively easily. They tend to pass pretty quickly. What I want you to take away is that there are a few simple things that you can do to make sure that that ankle sprain, that seemingly benign ankle sprain, doesn't come back as plantar fasciitis or Achilles pain or hamstring tendonitis or sciatica or even low back pain down the road. One of the first things you need to do, obviously, is to manage the acute phase of the injury. You want to bring down inflammation, you want to limit range of motion to allow healing to happen. You want things to actually tighten up, especially in that first few weeks of healing. You want to let your body do its job to restabilize that joint early on, especially make sure you don't re-injure it. Very quickly though, you want to be able to restore normal ankle dorsiflexion. That's normal ankle flexibility, usually in the direction opposite the way you sprained it. And I've talked about how to mobilize ankle dorsiflexion in the past. This is a very simple strategy to make sure that you get this part of your range of motion back so that the ankle is as stable as possible. The next thing you need to do when the ankle's ready is to restabilize or reactivate the muscles that were overstretched or some of the other muscles that were inhibited and shut down due to the pain and inflammation. I've also made a separate video with regard to how you can activate these muscles and get them back online again. This can happen very quickly, and it usually feels very good after an ankle sprain. Yesterday I talked about restoring proprioception and regaining balance over where you feel like you are in space. When there's a trauma to any joint, it loses the ability to sense where it is in space, but very quickly we can do things to reestablish that awareness, and it significantly reduces our risk of re-injuring our ankles, which is another very common side effect of an undertreated or ignored ankle sprain. The next thing you want to do is return to activity thoughtfully, but not be too timid. The ankle's a very strong and capable joint, and you want to challenge it to a level where you can rebuild your confidence, you can rebuild your stability in a functional way. So get back out there on the trails, challenge your ankle in a way that starts to re-strengthen it in real life scenarios, and do that when you feel like you're ready. Let pain be your guide, but don't be afraid to get on the bike and do things that are going to challenge your ankle in a healthy but responsible way. The last and most important thing I want to talk about, and the thing I get most excited about, is shoes. Now, I've had a ton of ankle sprains. I've fractured my right ankle. I've sprained them so many more times that I can count, playing tennis, trail running, doing other things. And I always take the time to rehabilitate them. I always take the time when other things flare up to get back to focusing on the things I need to do to keep my ankle strong and healthy. But the one thing I've learned over time is which shoes I can wear to best minimize my risk of ankle sprain, especially when I'm trail running. There are 4 key components that I like to think about when I'm looking for a new shoe to help me prevent ankle sprains. The first one is that I like to be relatively low to the ground. I like to have a shoe that has minimal foam, especially initially, so I can really feel the ground that I'm walking on. It helps me rebuild my proprioception, helps me rebuild the awareness of where my foot and ankle are in space, and if it's flexible, if it's a shoe that you can twist, and bend, and there's not a lot of stiffness to it, it's also going to help give you that ground feel that you're looking for to really minimize the risk of you re-injuring it as you're getting back into your sport. Another important feature about shoes is how rounded off the heel profile is. You can see that there's a very sharp angle to this shoe, and if I roll past a certain point, my ankle's gonna tip and I'm gonna sprain my ankle again as soon as I hit this critical point. There are shoes which have more of a rounded profile, which have this nice eased edge. And my opinion is that more shoe companies should take that seriously and build the heel of the shoe to look more like our natural heel, so that there's more of an ability for us to sort of bring the foot back. As we start to sprain it, we can bring the foot back to a more neutral position without that whack that we get with a sharp edge shoe. The next thing I think that's important with shoes is that there's not too much foam. There's a big movement right now towards shoes that have a ton of foam, which is amazing for lots of reasons. It helps people recover quickly, it's great for long runs, helps to protect your other joints. But what it does is it puts you further away from the ground, so you have less feel for what your foot's doing on the ground above all that foam. And it also puts you very high off the ground overall, which makes the shoe more tippy. It's like riding a bike with huge wheels, where if you fall, the consequences are much higher than if you're much lower to the ground. It's kind of like the idea of being a kid and falling versus being a very tall adult and falling. The lower you are to the ground, the less the consequences if your foot rolls, and the less likely that your foot's going to roll. So the higher the center of gravity, the more foam you have in the shoe, the greater the risk of ankle sprain, even if there are other benefits. So early on, I like to discourage people from buying shoes with tons of foam. The last bit to consider when it comes to picking a shoe to minimize the risk for ankle sprains is the relative heel height compared to the forefoot height. Now, traditionally, running shoes had a heel height that was 12 millimeters higher than the height of the forefoot, which essentially puts your foot toe down in plantar flexion. We know that after ankle sprain, we lose the ability to dorsiflex our ankle, which we've already talked about. Dorsiflexion is a position that's relatively more stable than plantar flexion. So if every time we run, we're spending a lot of time in plantar flexion with our ankle unlocked, the risk for injury is much higher. So while this is subtle, the change in your foot position to being more flat, and that you won't feel it a ton running, it makes a huge difference proprioceptively and from an injury risk perspective, in that the more flat we are, the less likely we are going to be to roll our ankles. Now, shoes have come from 12 millimeters down to 0 millimeters, where the foot is totally flat, kind of like if you were barefoot. This shoe is a 4 millimeter shoe. I think anything that's 4 millimeters or less is relatively safe and puts your foot close to a neutral position that will prevent you from losing ankle dorsiflexion and keep you in a more stable ankle and foot position to get back on the trails. So you guys, ankle spraining is a super common injury. It's not something to be scared of, but it's something to take seriously to make sure that down the road you don't have some negative consequence, some collateral damage, injury in some other joint that may be tied back to that ankle sprain. It's a very easy injury to ignore, to walk off, and to just let pass, but I want to discourage you from doing that. I want to encourage you to really consider your shoes, especially if you've had recurrent ankle sprains. And as always, I want to encourage you to seek out sound medical advice and sound rehabilitative advice when you're dealing with something like this. Thanks for tuning into StabilityWOD and listening to me spout off about ankle sprains and about my favorite topic, shoes. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Click the like button if you like what you saw today. Please leave me comments, thoughts, questions, feelings, or your experiences with ankle sprains in the past. Take a second to subscribe to StabilityWOD, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for tuning in.